Anyway,
No, we're good. We're live.
off of memory.
Yeah. Okay. Welcome back to another episode. I wanted to try to do something fun here with Larry. There's been a little social media challenge going around the last few days of the decade challenge 2009 to 2019, and people putting pictures up from 10 years ago and a picture now, and talking about the different things that they had going on in their lives. And so Larry bought his truck in 2009. So I thought it'd be kind of fun just for a minute to kind of roll through this and compare and kind of analyze our two stories of what we were doing in 2009 versus what we're doing now. 2009, I'll start. 2009, my middle son was born in June, and I was working for a small carrier in Columbus, Ohio called Sylvan Trucking. And I, I was just a company driver. And so at that point, we were trying to decide whether or not to move from Columbus back to West Virginia. And we ended up making that move, I think, in October. I did a series before Larry started on the podcast. There's a series called Dissecting a Decade that has the kind of 10 years in detail. So 2009, all of that, I was a company driver. So 2009, what were you doing?
Well, I was trying to convince Transport America to let me become an owner operator. I had been with them since Labor Day. Actually, yeah, Labor Day is when I actually started of 2008. So in 2009, for the first 6 months of the year, I was company driver, and I'd been driving, for a few months then, and I had obviously seen, the opportunity, and was trying to convince them to let me become an owner operator. And that's when they were telling me that I had to have a year's experience, blah, 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 which was in episode 49. So they did eventually let me do it. So I bought my truck in June of 2019, or 2009, I mean. So for the rest of 2009, I was a leased owner operator at Transport America. I was running over the road freight still, because I didn't get the opportunity to do FedEx until like November or late in the year. So I transitioned then from just general freight over the road driving to dedicated FedEx driving late in 2019 or 2009. And then, of course, after that, I stayed on that dedicated freight the entire rest of the time I was with Transport America.
I'm just thinking it's kind of funny because Levi was born in June 26th of 2009, Yep. And I think about him sitting there in the other room right now, probably watching YouTube or playing a video game, and he's pretty much the same age as your truck.
Yeah.
2010 was a rough year for me. I left Schneider. I had gone to Schneider because I couldn't stay at the company I was with, because they were based in Columbus, and we had decided to move back to West Virginia. And I got into January, and I hurt my shoulder doing a dedicated account that I hated with a passion. And so I quit. I was fed up, and I was done with this trucking garbage. And I messed around and took a job installing satellite dishes. And when the fog cleared from that, I think I made about $1,200 in 6 months. It was a complete disaster. And so I remember I was at my daughter's 2010, so I guess it would have been her fourth birthday party at a bowling alley, and I had tried to get a job with this Land Air Transport that did the big lots, and there was no room at the inn. And so I had contacted Heartland Express, and I was signed up to go to orientation, and I was at the bowling alley, and I got a call from Land Air, and they're like, "Hey, we got a spot. Do you want it?" And I'm like, "Well, sure." And they're like, "We have to be here tomorrow." Oh, okay. So loaded up the pickup truck and drove to Columbus, and spent the rest of 2010 working for them. and it was somewhere, I want to say about October, um, that's when I started this conversation in my head about being an owner operator and that being that next step and that grade 13, like you talked about in the last episode. I'm like, well, this is the natural step, And so I talked to a bunch of people, did a bunch of research, chose Anderson Trucking Service, and on New Year's Eve, I went to the station and got on the Greyhound White Trash Express to Indianapolis and headed on that adventure into 2011. So, what was your 2010 like?
Well, 2010 was my first CMC. So
Okay.
I had found Kevin Rutherford on the radio and been listening to. I tried to go in 2009, but they were sold out, and so I went ahead and prepaid for 2010. And so it was my first experience there, which obviously was life changing, and a lot of the things that we're doing now, obviously, were concepts that I was embracing for the first time at that point in time. I was getting used to the dedicated thing. Again, I was seeing the opportunity in that. I hadn't added any trucks yet, but the decision was the wheels were starting to turn, especially after going to the CMC in October that year. That we were that would be my growth potential would be to start adding trucks. So, just starting to wrap my mind around that, how I was going to do it. I had met Jimmy the Junk Man for the first time at the CMC, and he and I had started to develop a relationship. And he was, we were strategizing some things together at the time, and he was going to be my source for my first couple of trucks. So all this, the groundwork was being laid, but that pretty much that was the big event in 2010 was that.
So 2011 for me started, as I said, on the White Trash Express to Indianapolis, and between Columbus and Indianapolis, the bus had to pull over literally 3 times, and the bus driver would start threatening to call the cops because it was. we pulled out about 12:30 at night, and it was a 26-hour bus ride to St. Cloud, Minnesota. Get up there, and it was like 10 below zero or something stupid,
Did
and
you say 20-hour bus ride?
26.
26 hours. Jeez.
26. Yeah. Yeah. If you, I mean, I think literally if you want to experience purgatory and hell on earth, just go get on a Greyhound, and just pick a destination 1,000 miles away. So went through my orientation with Anderson, picked out my truck, started with him in January. Really, I remember having a conversation with my wife just after Easter because I was trying to do like an every other third weekend home. And she even saw that as long as I was driving, I was making money. But when I would lose so much, and she was like, look, you're going to do this. You're just going to have to go out and run. And so we made the decision at Easter of 2011 that I would run 6 to 8 weeks and I would come home for 4 or 5 days and I'd do 6 to 8 weeks. And that worked. I was able to make enough money, but left her at home with a toddler and a 4-year-old. We had moved back to Columbus in the fall of 2010, and so the rest of 2011 really went off pretty well. I did have one major mistake where I knocked the bottom out of my radiator, being stupid, and got to experience that first. Oh crap! They're not bringing me another truck. This is the only truck I have, and I've made this giant stupid decision, and had rented a car and drove home and had to sit there and wait for them to fix my truck. But other than that, 2011 was really a good year. I think I did. I ran 100,000 miles and I made $178,000 gross to the truck. So I had a pretty good rate per mile. 2011 was pretty good. So what was your 2011? Is that when you bought your first truck?
Added the first truck in 2011. Hired my first driver, and of course this FedEx thing. I was getting pretty good at that. They liked me. They gave me the opportunity to bring these trucks on and put them on straight on with FedEx. I had earned their respect at that point in time, and they were pretty much willing letting me call my own shots there as far as my other drivers go. So we took this route that was it was a problem route. They could never get anybody to do it right. I'm thinking it was Indianapolis up to somewhere in New York, and it was a pretty difficult route to do. But we took it and perfected it, and of course, the trucks, were doing about a quarter of a million to the truck, per year. So that was the beginning of my um, vision for what became Blue Ribbon Logistical Solutions at that point in time, and I could just see that that the opportunity was there. I just didn't know if I could, I didn't know how many routes they would give me, and how difficult it'd be. Because the hardest thing for me was hiring drivers. It was just a very very difficult thing. I thought it would be easy because I thought I could find me. I thought
Hmm.
that this would be so attractive, you know, that people would just be falling out of the woodwork, and that this route, because it's so consistent and so profitable, that everybody would want to be on it. And I found out that nobody wanted to be on it because nobody really wanted to work that hard,
Yeah.
because you literally had to work. I mean, you had to, it's very, very, very demanding in terms of service level, and you especially trying to make that New York thing work. It required, keeping the door shut and staying in the truck and getting there. So it was my first experience in hiring drivers, and learned a lot about the industry at that point in time. Again, I remember I came in this thing 2007, 2008, and didn't know anything about it. And I assumed I'd find lots of me out there, but what was I shocked? So and developing some relationships. I mean, I was Indianapolis based. All my trucks were, and so developing networks with shops up there, and vendors and that sort of thing. Because obviously we had to have those relationships because the trucks had to roll. So we literally had a situation where we had a Detroit shop there where we would park the trucks in. You know, um, when they were taking their 10-hour break in Indianapolis, we'd park there. If when we went home on the weekends, we left the trucks there. So we had this overnight service provided by them. Whatever needed to be fixed was fixed while we were out of the truck. Even remember we had a really really bad winter. Don't remember if it was exactly 2011 or not, but we had a really really bad winter up there, and they actually let me run extension cords out of the building and plug all of our trucks up out in the parking lot. We had a really
Wow.
really good relationship going with them. We really really did. So I had the key of the gate code, so we could come and go. They closed like at midnight. So we could come and go as we pleased, and so just uh, just doing that, and just keeping things going at the same time, trying to get my head around what this expansion was going to look like, and what I needed to do next. I had Jimmy and I were working together. He was buying trucks at auction, and he was doing the refurbs and stuff at the time, and I was buying them from him. So he was sort of my truck broker, if you will. So we were working together now, and my relationship with him was starting to be developed. So yeah, I think that's about the time where I bought, probably late in 11 or early in 12. I bought the twin truck. So I bought two sisters that came from the same fleet, and I think that's about the time that we probably added those on, probably in 2012. But
2012, I completed the way the Anderson lease deal was set up as a 1 year lease, and you got a $3,200 bonus check at the end. So you could complete your lease, they would write you a check, and you could walk away. They just and so of course, we already had the bonus check spent before it even came. We took the kids to Disney at the end of February, and that was all in $7,000, but we paid for it. And I was kind of proud of myself. I think that I had made it through this first year of leasing a truck. Um, I had a good income, and my reward was going to be this trip to take the kids to Disney. And wow, that mouse is good at extracting money from people. Uh, but I'll never forget, as long as I live. My daughter was she was 5, and we went to the Bippity Boppity Boutique, and
Hmm.
they dressed her for $250. They dressed her up in a princess outfit and did her hair and makeup and all that stuff. And of course, it was a $3 dress and a $2 tiara and a $250 makeup job. But to watch her walk around that park all day and everybody refer to her as princess, whew, just
Sure.
oh yeah, I did that all day long. Um, and I remember driving home. We left Disney on Friday night, stayed for the fireworks at Magic Kingdom, jumped in the van, hauled ass up to Georgia somewhere, got a motel, took a nap, drove back home, got home late Saturday night. I went straight. She dropped me off. We unloaded the van, went straight to my truck, got in my truck, and drove to Louisville because I had to pick up a load. Um, and the rest of 2012 was pretty cool. I went to a NASCAR truck race at Texas. Just happened to unload across the street, and God bless Eddie Gossage. Free truck parking is kind of hard to beat. And that was actually the race, if you remember that Kyle Busch got parked
Oh yeah.
for turning Ron Hornaday head on into the wall. And I was there to watch that live. So 2012 was a pretty good year, but I knew the truck that I had was an '07, had 389,000 miles on it when I got it. And I knew at the end of that lease, they weren't going to let me lease it a third time because I basically in January, I walked in, I signed the new lease. They handed me my $3,200 check, and I was in the building 30 minutes, and so I knew I had a decision to make going into 13 because I'm like, oh man, I'm going to have to get one of these new trucks, because all the '07s were gone. There was none of those around, and man, I begged, let me lease this one more time, and it had 600 and some thousand miles on it. And I'm like, no. And then I remember the guy saying, it's on the verge of a catastrophic failure. It's just any minute now. It's going to have a catastrophic failure. You don't want that truck.
And he knew that.
Yeah. Well, he knew he was going to set that thing
How?
on a lot and sell it for about 35 grand.
Yeah.
I'd love to have that truck back. And so I was just preparing in 2012 to have to make a move, and a friend of mine was talking me into going to the flatbed division over there. And so that's kind of what 2012 ended up trying to figure out how I was going to do that. So what was your
Well,
2012 like?
2012, we definitely had those other two trucks on by then. So now we're four. Um, you can do the math. Life was good. We were. I was trying to figure out how to get somebody in my truck. Because at that point in time, I was kind of thinking, well, I don't really need to be driving right now. I can live off what these trucks are generating easily. But it again, hiring drivers was still a huge challenge, a very very big challenge, and I really could never. I had a couple of guys try. I could never get, and I was not going to let this. Somebody come in and screw this up. Because it was just too lucrative. So
Well, you told me one time about this schedule that you ran when you were doing this, about how much sleep you were getting and driving. Run through that schedule real quick.
well,
How you?
it's on I would my week would start. Now again, remember I live in Lexington, Kentucky. I'm operating out of Indianapolis, Indiana. So that's 200 miles right there. Okay. So my week would start Monday night at 11 p.m. That's when I would load at the airport to go to. Well, I would go to Carlisle, but the load eventually went on up to Elizabeth, New Jersey. But to refresh your memory, I would drop and hook in Carlisle with a local guy, and he would take it on the rest of the way, and then he would bring me back the other load. I would sit there and take my 10-hour break. So I'd drive 11 o'clock at night. I'd get there, I don't know, 9 or so in the morning, um, drop my load, take my 10-hour break, and then I would come back. He would bring me the load back loaded from Elizabeth. I'd get on the road again, 9 or 10 that night, something like that. I'd come back and deliver into Indianapolis the next morning, 7 o'clock or so, and then I would go to bed. Okay, so I would sleep during the day in Carlisle. I would sleep during the day in Indianapolis. So I did two of those rounds a week: Monday and Tuesday, and then Wednesday and Thursday. And when I first took the gig, that was the extent of it. But if you remember, I kept adding to it. So I would then my Friday was a round trip. It was a 700-mile round trip from Indianapolis to North Jackson, Ohio, and back. It was actually 660 miles paid, but it was 700 miles really to drive it. So I would leave about 5 p.m. and I would get back. Right. I had minutes left on my clock, so I would get back at like 7 in the morning on Sunday morning, okay, or on Saturday morning. So then I would sleep again. I'd do that again on Saturday night. So I got back Sunday morning about 7 o'clock. I would jump in my personal vehicle. I'd park the truck at the Detroit shop. I'd get my personal vehicle. I'd drive home. So I'd be home by about noon. Okay. I would go to bed and I would sleep 14 hours. Okay. Straight through. And so I would get up whenever that was, sometime Monday. And then I would see my wife for 3 or 4 hours. I would get back in my personal vehicle and drive back to Indianapolis Monday night, start all over again. So I got my 34-hour reset in on the weekend, if you don't count the drive time in my personal vehicle back and forth from Indianapolis to Lexington. Back.
You earned every penny of that 250 grand, didn't you?
It was a challenge, and it was a problem because I couldn't find anybody else that could or would do it.
Yeah.
So I was never able to replace myself in that particular. Now we only did one. All the other trucks, the schedule was somewhat less than that, and also the pay was somewhat less than that. But I wasn't going to let it go, and I wasn't going to not deliver. So I pretty much did it for 4.5 years.
Well, and
Yeah.
I think the important principle of everybody hang on right there is what you said. I see a lot of people, they're like, well, what? I want to hire a driver. Well, you cannot replace yourself.
No.
Just you can't. It's not possible. Nobody's going to work as hard as you. Nobody's going to take as good a care of your truck as you will. Nobody's going to get the fuel mileage you will. You have to understand that immediately. Just
by
to
the
think.
way, I'm getting 9.2 miles per gallon.
It's incredible.
So
uh,
that was 2012. It was just mainly just continuing on, banking money, trying to figure what I was going to do. I was, again, the wheels are turning. And Jimmy and I had all these, um, thoughts and plans. He had some pretty grandiose ideas that he wanted to try to do, and of course I was still going to the CMC again, and then by this time I was on the staff, so I was actually working the CMC, and I don't remember what year we changed the CMC from October to April, long in there somewhere. It could have been that year. I don't remember, um, but that was a big part of my life too. Was networking and starting to have relationships with all these people. These 400 or 500 people that go to the CMC every year. They're all, just top 1% type. Really, really doing things right. Good businesses, strong businesses. Good business practices. So just sharing that. The radio show was at midnight back then, so the call-in show was at midnight. I was a pretty regular contributor to that because I was driving every night. So, and when I wasn't talking on the radio, we were talking on the phone to each other, the other networkers. So stayed busy pretty much. Talked on the phone most all night, and there was a couple of other drivers at Transport America that I'd friended up with that also were doing. Like there was a lot of Indianapolis to Minneapolis stuff, and a couple of those guys got to know me through the radio show, and so we would start talking at each other at night, and to kind of keep each other awake and so forth. So, uh, but really, other than that 2012 was just a big growth year for us because we doubled the trucks,
mhm.
doubled the income, and then continued on with with our growth in the our education and so forth of this industry. Again, I'm still learning.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of stuff I still was trying to get my head around. So
2013, I had made the decision to switch over to the specialized flatbed division at Anderson. Um, and I wanted to, my plan was, I thought, okay, well, I just did 2 years of specialized van. I did pad wrap, I did household goods. I'd really kind of increase my profile. And I thought, well, if I go over and do this specialized thing and I start doing oversized, because I had this plan that from the time I started, I wanted to have a paid for truck in 5 years. I knew that leasing was a temporary thing. And I thought, well, I've got to make enough money and all this stuff, and I want to have a paid for truck in 5 years. And so I knew I was going to have to get a truck, and the big question then was Cummins or Detroit. Which is it? And so I picked a 386 Peterbilt, and God, through the day, the truck from hell, just a nightmare. You know, changed everything from the turbo to the tailpipe. Nothing ever fixed it. Couldn't keep it out of the shop. Cost me $50,000 in 7 months. It was just, I would get in the hole. I would dig myself out of the hole and fall right back in it, and the truck would break down. And in I think it was July, July maybe early August, I took the kids to Kings Island Amusement Park. We were living in Columbus, and I had a check engine light, so I took it to Columbus Peterbilt, dropped it off, went to Kings Island, come back. Hey, truck's fixed. All right, great. I said, well, hey, man, I appreciate you getting my truck fixed. He said, yeah, you're good till the next time it breaks. I'm like, appreciate that. Vote of confidence. And it turns out he was right, because 650 miles later in Des Moines, it quit again and shut down, and I had to be towed. And I walked in to us 2 days there. Some guy comes and, because back then Canada loads were the money, you know, and I watched some other guy drive off with my $10,000 Canada load. And I walked into the shop and I said, can you tell me why it quit? And he said, nah, I don't have a clue. We changed the fitting. We recalibrated the computer. And while I was sitting in the motel, I had a friend that I had met in orientation that January who had been at ATS, and I think he got caught up in all that CDL sleep apnea garbage. So he had left and gone and leased a truck from Lone Mountain and took it to Landstar and was loving life. And every time I talked to him, his name was Elvis, black dude named Elvis. And he's like, oh, man, you got to come over to Landstar, man. I'm telling you, this is where it's at. And so I called Lone Mountain, and she answered the phone. I said, what's the oldest truck you got? She said, 2007 Freightliner. I said, I'm on my way. I bobtailed over there. No, I took an empty trailer. I went over there. I looked at the truck, begged, borrowed, and stole to get the money for the down payment, called Anderson, said, I'm done. He's like, well, let me get you another truck. Nope, 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 nope. I'm done. I got me another truck's right here. And started. That's when I got my first taste of the Landstar qualification process. And I waited, and I waited, and I waited, and I waited, and I called every day. And I'm living in a motel room. I'm riding a bicycle that I went and got from Walmart, because I had no way to. I had no way. I don't even think we had Uber yet. And so I'm riding a bicycle around Council Bluffs, Iowa. And when I got done to go let her leave, I took the bike back to Walmart and turned it back in for the money. But I waited, and I was like, I can't do this. But you had to have a carrier, and before they would let you sign the lease. And I said, well, what, can I use Anderson? She was like, sure, you can use Anderson. I called my dispatcher back, my fleet manager, and I said, hey, I just bought a truck. If I lease it on there, can I get back on your board? He said, absolutely. And within 3 hours, I was headed to St. Cloud, bobtailed up there, had to go through orientation again. I made I'm not exact on these numbers, but I'm close. I made like $155,000 gross on my 1099 in 2013. $70,000 of that was done in my truck, September, October, November, December. August, September, October, November, December. 5 months. More than half of the revenue was earned. I mean, I was slaying it. I had one net settlement was over $6,000 from one load. They had these. They had some deal with Walmart where they were trying to get these stand ups that they put in the aisles, for like a product, deodorant or whatever. They were trying to ship them with LTL carriers, but the LTL carriers were screwing them up. So Anderson said, well, hey, come and put them on our trailer and we'll just do 20 stops. So I would have these loads where I'd have like 20, 22, 24 stops, and the money was obscene. It was absolutely obscene. And so by the time I got to the end of 2013, I had dug myself out of the hole. And of course, we'd lost our house. Thank God our van was paid for. But I was by the end of 2013, I was back in the money and I had my own truck. I wasn't at Landstar yet, but I was getting close.
Well, 2013 was a big year. A lot of things changed. Number one, the new hours of service requiring 2 consecutive nights of 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. in order to get a 34-hour reset in.
What a disaster.
So my world came crashing down at FedEx because it cost me $900 per truck per week to lose that day. $900 per truck per week is what it cost me. And of course, it cost the driver in that truck money because we had to get a reset. So that's when I started moving trucks around. I happened to move one of them to Landstar. And I went to, because orientation was in Indianapolis and I was in Indianapolis anyway. I attended the orientation with the driver just so I could learn about this land. I had met a lot of drivers at Landstar through the CMC, and I mean, I knew a lot about Landstar, but I never had firsthand knowledge,
Mm-hmm.
So I went with the driver, attended the orientation with the driver as the truck owner, not as the operator. And so that was, obviously an interesting experience, my first, and I'll have to admit to you, I was highly disappointed, because in my mind, the Landstar was the elite, the epitome of where you want to be. And the orientation was about the worst I'd ever sat through, in any kind of thing I've ever been involved with. And it was incomplete. It was unimpressive. It just left a lot to be desired. And so, I left with mixed emotions. Now the opportunity ended up being fantastic, which is really what I wanted, but. I was pretty critical, and they handed out a survey, and I really, I was very, very, very explicit about what I thought they needed to do, to their program, to make it better. And so I'm sure we got to start off on a great foot right there. So I've got a truck at Landstar now. I'm still running my truck, but I'm running it only 5 days a week. So, but I'm moving. I moved other. I put one of my other trucks with UPS Freight. I put one of them with the household
North
goods.
American.
And it wasn't North American. It was another one.
Oh, I thought you said North American. Van Lines.
Well, it was some household. I don't remember which one it was. Yeah. Red, white, and blue trucks.
Oh, yeah, I know what you're talking about.
So I was experimenting with what we were going to do, So I was trying to. I thought, well, we can't stay here, so let's just move them around. I stayed put, and I had everybody else. We just tried different things, and of course, long story short, all of them ended up eventually being at Landstar. So I was dispatching a truck at Landstar, for my driver, Charlie, and I mean, we were killing it. I'm thinking, well, damn, if I can do this for one truck, I can do it for 2.
Yeah.
So March of that year, I go to Transport America and I say, guys, I'm sorry to tell you this, but I'm out. Well, it literally broke their heart. I mean, they tried everything they could do to get me to stay. And I said, guys, from what I can tell from my truck at Landstar, there's no, I mean, listen, I have no hard feelings. I would rather stay here. If there was a way that I could make this money with this opportunity here, I would stay. And they tried everything to try to make that happen. And I said, look, guys, you cannot compete with this. And they finally, they finally agreed. I said, look, I mean, for a lot of guys, and they're right. I mean, at the time I thought they were blowing smoke, but they're right because I'm not the first person who left there to go to Landstar. And
Right.
they said, look, a lot of guys go and come back because they're not used to doing a lot of these things that we do for you. Probably you're not going to have that problem because you're pretty much got your ass together. Um, and so I left. I went to Landstar as a driver, and Charlie and I we ran together though. So we ended up doing propane out in the Chicago market all summer long, from Labor Day, from Memorial Day to Labor Day. We did for a week, and we killed it. We killed it, and so and then, I mean, life was good. I mean, even though the other trucks were other places, we are still doing pretty good. But I could see their handwriting on the wall that we were all coming to Landstar, and I could just project out to what there was going to be. And I was a little concerned because my quarterly taxes were not reflecting this additional income. So I had a meeting with my accountant, and this was in July. And I said, here's what I'm projecting to do. We really need to adjust, my taxes. I said the only thing that can change, because we were talking about, what's the upside, what's the downside, what's reality here, is this what's the worst can happen? I said the worst can happen is something happens to me and I cannot function. That's the only thing that stops this train. Labor Day weekend, 2013. I'm leaving the bank on Monday afternoon, getting ready to get in my private vehicle to drive to Indianapolis, okay, to start my thing, okay, and I get I get I'm in a little two-seater Saturn Sky, little roadster, tops down, nice day, sitting in a traffic light. I hear these squealing tires.
Mm.
Out of the corner of my eye, I see this car in a spin, in a flat spin, coming right at me. And there's a car in front of me. There's a car behind me. I'm in a line of traffic. Not a thing I can do. And this car just slams ass in front right into the driver's door, my little roadster, and broke my arm in four places.
Mm.
And so I didn't know it at first, and I thought, well, Mary Lou was with me. I checked to make sure she was okay. She had a little seatbelt trauma, and I thought, well, we're good. And all of a sudden, I couldn't move my left arm. And all of a sudden, I started hurting really, really bad. I look over there, and my bicep or my shoulder was the size of a basketball already in just a matter of a couple minutes. So I get a very expensive ambulance ride, 1 mile to a hospital, and $2,500, and literally 1 mile to a hospital. And find out my arm's broken in four places. Guess what? I'm not going to be doing for a while, driving. And so I called my buddy Jimmy. I said, Jimmy, I need you to get qualified at Transport America and drive this truck, And I think I misspoke there. I hadn't moved my truck to Transport to Landstar yet. I was still at Transport America when I had this wreck. So Charlie was there by himself. Okay, and so Jimmy goes to orientation and comes to Indianapolis and drives my truck for me for about 8 weeks while I recover, and it keeps my FedEx route going even with the one night, less because of the reset. And then after that is when I moved it. When I got back to Transport America, I then moved the truck to to FedEx, or excuse me, to Landstar.
Yeah.
So that was 2013. It was a really, really, really disruptive thing. Obviously, from a personal standpoint, being hurt and being. I'm telling you guys, I'd never been in so much pain. It was 10 days before I could get my arms. This happened on a Monday. Wednesday, a week later, is when my surgery was to correct it. 10 days later. In those 10 days, I was on a liquid opioid because the pills wouldn't last. The pills you could only take every 6 hours, and they would run out at 4 hours. And I would be
Mm.
in so much pain for 2 hours I couldn't stand it. I couldn't even lay down. I sat in a chair for 10 days because I couldn't lay down. And so they would switch me to a liquid form of opioid because it would last longer, and I could get through to the next dose before uh, I would be in pain again. So I existed as an opioid zombie for 10 days. Hadn't really
Wow.
had any sleep, to speak of. I remember going over for the surgery, and they were going to give me a what do you call the shots you give ladies?
Epidural.
Epidural. They were going to give me an epidural, for the surgery. So that's an $1,800 shot, by the way. Okay. So they gave me this epidural in my right through the top of my shoulder, and instantly I had no pain, and I just remember I went to sleep for the first time in 10 days, and I slept like a baby. Okay. Well, there was an interruption. My case got moved down because an emergency came in, and it got moved down so far away from the start time that the epidural wore off. So I
Oh,
had to get a second $1,800 epidural to get me, into the surgery. But I mean, I finally got some sleep. I said, look, I don't care as long as I can go back to sleep and get some rest. I don't care what you have to do to make it happen. And so, but and they actually had a replacement shoulder, a steel looking contraption that they were going to put in me. Um, and but during the surgery, they came out and talked to my wife and said, well, it's not as bad once we're in there as we thought. We think we can fix it. Now, there's a chance that it still may fail, and we might have to go back in and put this replacement shoulder in. And Mary Lou said, well, let's try it then. So they went in, they put 9 screws and a plate, which I still have, by the way, in my arm, and it hasn't failed. So it worked out. So I don't have a shoulder replacement after all. I've got my shoulder. But in that bone that goes from the ball down to your elbow, I've got a metal plate about, I don't know, 6 inches, 8 inches long in there with 9 screws in there. So,
wow.
so that's my 2013.
So 2014 started out pretty good. Took my 2 weeks off. I was still doing those crazy Walmart loads, and so the money was still great. Uh, well, in the state of Minnesota, there was some weird requirement. I don't remember exactly, but I do remember that at ATS, the owner operators' trucks were plated in Minnesota, so you had to have a sticker on the windshield, just like a state inspection sticker. And all the lease trucks were plated in Indiana. So when it was time for my federal annual inspection that they did twice a year, where we do them every 120 days, I had to go. It'd been 6 months, and I had to go to Minneapolis. So they sent me over to this Freightliner dealer that the carrier owns, by the way. Found that out later. And this guy comes up with this $6,000 bill. And I'm like, no, no, no. Well, I start looking at it, and it's a bunch of bullshit. The grill, one of the little bolts with those screws was, I needed a new grill instead of one of those $20 screws. And so I start going through and I'm checking off all the stuff that's not DOT, and I got it down to $1,500. But I had just been off for 2 weeks, and I said, guys, I don't have this $1,500 right now. So I had dropped the truck off at the shop to have the inspection done, and I went over to the corporate office, and I had sat down with the VP of the van division, and he thanked me for my service and told me I was number one guy. I was their number one revenue generator on the van division. And, it was just a great conversation. We talked about the future of freight and company and all this stuff. And I come out of his office and I go to my fleet manager and I said, hey man, listen, I don't have $1,500 right now to do this. And of course it was dog bones, as you can imagine, um, and something else. I don't, and he was like, well, we're not a bank. And I'm like, okay. Now by this point, I'd already talked to lots of people at Landstar, and I knew Landstar would give, loans, and Landstar would help you out. And I just assumed so would Anderson. And so they put me down in the seat beside this winch at her desk, and she made me beg. I literally was on the verge of tears for them to give me $1,000 promissory note and take $500 out of my escrow account, and they made me beg for it. And as soon as I signed that piece of paper, I walked out to my truck, got my laptop out, renewed my application for Landstar, and I was gone within 3 weeks. And uh, the
And they wanted to know why.
oh, they asked a lot. Hey, well, why are you doing this? I finally said, listen, guys, here's the deal. Y'all are really good at leasing trucks. You really are. I mean, I can't say a bad thing about you. Your freight's good. Your customers are great. Your lease process is probably the least parasitic of any that exist in the industry. But this ain't a good place for owner operators. It's just that I don't fit here with my truck. And I said, so I'm going to Landstar. And so I went home in April and peeled all the stickers off the truck and went through the process. And you and I were talking the other day about something, and it made me. I started digging into my settlements from 2014, and I was shocked to look back and see that coming in being a dart without feathers, having no clue what I was doing $5,000-6,000 a week to the truck. I was killing it when I came here, but I was so free. I didn't have a dispatcher telling me what I couldn't do or wouldn't do, and didn't have anybody to talk to or answer to. And all I had to do was go out and run freight. And so our third child was due in October, and about, I don't know, a month before he was born, I got this call out of the blue from an agent, and they said, hey, we've got this dedicated run that's close to your house. We're trying to get this business. Would you like to run it one week and see what you think? And I said, sure, I'll try it once. And that's the same customer I haul for today. I've had a relationship with him for 5 years, but I wasn't even looking for it. It just came out of the blue, and I started working for them and pretty much exclusively, and have been with them the majority of 5 years.
Well, 2014, all the trucks were at Landstar, and I finally put a driver in my truck for the first time. I was actually a fleet owner, not a driver. And of course, 2014 started, freight became a little more of a challenge starting in 2014. We were having to work a little harder to make the same money. It was a little bit of a rate, recession, much like it is right now, And so I had all these trucks at Landstar. So it was a good thing I wasn't a driver, because it was a full-time job as a dispatcher to keep the guys in freight, to keep their incomes up where we expect them to be. So, I got really good at dispatching and finding loads and keeping, and that's when I started really developing my strategy for dedicated freight, because I mean, if you're trying to load 4 trucks every day, all day long, that's a lot of work. It's a big job. And because things always are changing, loads are canceling and whatnot, and trucks breaking down. It's just a lot. So the dedicated thing was an easier route for me. And by the way, it turned out that it made it easier for us to be consistent with our driver pay, because we knew what they were going to make. Mm-hmm. So I started developing those relationships with GAD and CGI and VAM and some of the agents that were using to do a lot of FedEx. Obviously, I was very partial to FedEx because I'd had a very, very long experience with them, and so I was attracted to that even here at Landstar. So we were doing a lot of FedEx stuff, at that time, and we even did some Walmart, whatever you call that, power only Walmart stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
because it was pretty consistent, and it kept the income up for the drivers. So 2014 really was just getting used to being at Landstar, keeping all the trucks busy. Me kind of developing my skills more as a load selector at Landstar on the load board, learning how to use the board. how to use some of the tools, developing relationships. Really, I don't think anything too unusual happened in 2014 and even 2015. Now, um, 2015, I ended up, I started the lease purchase program with two of my trucks to the drivers. So we started that in 2015. So a couple of my drivers had expressed interest in owning trucks and whatnot, and so I agreed to let them buy the trucks they were driving for me on a 2-year lease purchase. And so that was the first time for that. We were working through that program and setting up how that was going to work, what that was going to look like for the drivers, and working it at Landstar because they had to actually work under my BCO number, so we had to work out how the settlements were going to work and everything. So that's really the only thing that happened in 2015 for me that was different. But it got two of my trucks, two of my four trucks were then committed to be sold. Probably that's when I started thinking about, well, I might scale this thing down a little bit, and then maybe look at pulling the plug and retiring in a couple of years, after I try to find a way getting the other two, sold. So sure, that was when we were, that was our strategy, was to sort of let the thing sort of attrit and just let these trucks go to drivers and probably not replace them, so.
2015, doing the dedicated run. But I knew when I took that run, I needed more money. It wasn't by itself, it wasn't enough. And so I started looking around, and I found that I could hustle home on Friday and pick up a load around the house, take it up to Michigan or Ohio, and deliver it Monday morning. Pick up another load, bring it back Tuesday, and deliver it close to where my dedicated run started. And man, the market was hot. I was making killer money. I had my dedicated run as an anchor. I would do these little extra loads. I would still get my restart, but I was making an extra, in some cases, almost $2,000 a week just doing these little extra runs because they were crazy. And May we moved into a new house that was kind of a fixer upper. And I remember going to, what an idiot, went to this big appliance store. And we needed a new set of appliances like we needed a hole in the head. But I was making all this money. And I said these out loud. I'm like, well, I can just go run an extra load. That's all I got to do. I can make $2,000 on the weekend. So that was great until June, and it all just disappeared. It was probably July. It just went away. And all those loads were no longer in play. They didn't exist. And I had a breakdown June 15th. It was so minor. The truck just started running funny, and I wasn't having, it wouldn't boost. It turned out to be the boost sensor, the ambient, or the barometric pressure sensor. I had put I stopped at a Freightliner dealer, and they plugged it up, and I said, he said, it's either your V-pod or your boost sensor. And I said, which one do you think it is? He said, V-pod. So I went and bought a V-pod, got it down the road, changed the V-pod, didn't fix it, had to leave it at the Freightliner dealer. That ended up being a $900 and some repair, and I didn't have the money. And that was when the warning bells started to go off for me that I had managed to survive a lot of things. But the fact that I had to go to Landstar for $900 for just a minor repair, and the stress started piling up then, and the apprehension of hey, I'm in a really precarious situation here. And about August, I took a load up to Connecticut, and it paid so well I was just going to deadhead back to my dedicated run. And on the way up there, I remember I have like the vision. I don't know exactly. I was climbing some hill somewhere, and the truck coughed really hard and hesitated, and it put out this giant plume of white smoke. And I was like, "Wow, that was weird." And then it didn't do anything else. And I stopped back in Greencastle, PA, at the TA on the deadhead back. And the next morning, my low coolant light came on, and I'm like, "Well, that's weird." I couldn't find any sign of a leak. Well, over the next week or so, I realized that I was pushing water out the overflow, and talked to my friend Dan, that's been on the podcast, and we went over 1,000 different things that it could be. And December 21st, my dedicated runs off, and I picked up a couple of loads just to do before Christmas, and I found out that it was a blown head gasket. I had dropped the liner, and on December 21st, it let go. And I was 4 days before Christmas with what I assumed was kind of a blown engine. I didn't really know what was going to happen. And a friend of mine came and rescued me, took me to his house. My wife came and got me. And I had no idea at that point what was going to happen. And it was after the first of the year before we got the news as to what would happen next.
Well, 2015.
16.
Well, I got to go back to 2015.
Oh, okay.
I did buy another truck. I found a truck that I couldn't resist. So I did buy another truck. And so when I bought that other truck, I put the driver that was in my truck in it, and I got back in my truck because now the two guys that were doing the lease purchase, they were doing their own dispatch and everything. So I really felt like I wasn't working anywhere. So I needed something to keep me busy. So I went back and started driving my truck again, And so that went on in 2015. And going into 2016, my driver that was in my truck that I put in the truck that I bought, he had an accident, totaled the truck, and it was his fault. And so Landstar terminated him. So the truck I had less than a year. It was totaled, and we junked it and got the insurance money. And I didn't really replace that truck again. I did start looking for another driver later on that year, and did end up finding another driver to start driving my truck again. But really not anything going on in 2016 other than we're just trying again. Rates were a challenge. I was concerned that the two guys who were buying the truck from me, I was worried about whether or not they were going to be able to make it. So I was really working with them real closely, trying to keep them running. One of the guys was doing great. One of them was just lazy anyway, but he made enough to suit him. It would never have suited me, but since it didn't matter, he was paying his truck payment, so I didn't really concern myself too much about it. But really, 2016 to me was pretty uneventful. The fact that we lost that one truck, but I think at the time my mindset was still that I still want to try to let this thing sort of gradually. I was really trying to find what I was going to do with my truck. The metrosexual. I didn't. It wasn't something that anybody really wanted. It was the nicest truck in my fleet. It was worth the most money, but I just didn't know what I was going to do with it. So I thought, well, I'll put a driver in and just drive it as far along as I can, and make some money off having a driver. So
Yeah.
That was my thinking then, and that's what I hired Raleigh. And that turned out to be okay. Older guy. He was treated the truck nice and lived in Indianapolis, so it was pretty close. Had him run dedicated freight. I think starting that year and next year we were doing over $8,000 a week to that truck. On a FedEx freight. So
2016 started for us. We didn't know what was going to happen. I dropped that truck off 4 days before Christmas, and I'm like, what do you think? They're like, man, we're not even going to look at it until after the first of the year. And I'm like, okay. So went home. I think I had $500 to my name, and met with our pastor because I'm like, we're screwed. And I explained the situation to him, and he was like, yeah, you need a miracle. And I'm like, yeah, yeah, sure do. So I'd asked him if he thought it was appropriate that I do one of these online fundraiser things because GoFundMe had kind of just started. And he was like, yeah, man, you're in a legitimate bad spot. So I wrote this out and rewrote it and rewrote it and rewrote it. And finally I gave it to my wife and she looked at it. She was like, yeah, it's good. So I posted it, turned my phone off, went to bed. Next morning I woke up and like 2,500 bucks had been donated. And I was like, wow, okay. All right. Well, we'll survive the next few weeks. And so the estimate had come in from the Freightliner dealer, $24,000 for a new engine,
Mm.
and had $500. And I'm like, well, I'm done. I'm finished. I had called Lone Mountain because I still owed $5,000 on the truck, and they're talking about, well, we'll take it on a trade, we'll put you in a newer truck. But I was still terrified of at that point a 2011, 2012 truck with those emissions, and I just thought, man, that's how the frying pan into the fire. And I got a Facebook message from a guy that I'd never met, been Facebook friends with, coincidentally since January of 2011. And he says, call me. So I called him, and he said, listen, my wife and I, we read your story, and he said, we believe that we're supposed to help you. And I'm like, okay, well, that's awesome. He's like, so we're gonna pay for your engine. And I said, you're gonna do what? And he said, yeah. So he sent me a $24,000 check in the mail. And I think the deal was 2,000 of it was a gift and 22,000 we would repay. And so I got the truck fixed. The engine came in just under 20,000. So we had some little bit of money left over, but I still had not reconciled all those feelings that I started having in June 2015. All of those feelings of you are in over your head, you have no idea what you're doing, you are digging a hole you can't get out of, you have made a giant mess and it's coming home to roost. And but I just kept pushing forward. And all of 2016 uh, was just I struggled to find freight. Rates were not great, but they were good enough if I would have had my mind right to be able to see it. But I was so clouded with guilt and trying to figure out why in the world would this idiot send me this check. And I knew I'd made this mess. I knew I was the only one responsible for it. Why in the world am I being bailed out? I absolutely do not deserve this. And so my best friend Zeke, he and I talked ourselves into running team, which was good because we got to spend time with each other and we had a great time. But he had stuff going on in his life, and about the time that culminated, my father-in-law just unexpectedly passed away, and that freaked me out because I'm thinking, okay, well, here he was just riding the tractor one day and just fell over dead, and what have I done? And I just lost it. I just completely flipped out and put the truck up for sale and came home and signed up to drive a school bus of all things. I mean, just what I mean,
You
I
had
mean,
flipped.
oh, it just and so I stayed home for 2 months, and the truck was parked at our church. And and what the 2 month break actually gave me some clarity. And I thought, oh wait, you've got a truck. It's sitting right there, and I had paid it off. I'd paid the last payments. I had the title, and I thought that truck's sitting right there. What are you doing? And so I thought, well, what would I do? If I started all over again, how would I do this different? And I started thinking of a kind of a different way to pick loads, and so December 27th, I went back on the road, and um, and I kind of sort of got my mind right. I was at least kind of heading in a better direction. Um, and so going into January, dude, I had the best January I'd had in 5 years. You know, And I was like, wow. And of course, I looked around me and everybody's freaking out because the market sucks so bad. But I was killing it, you know. And I was doing that 1250 a day, and I'm like, wow. And so I get to February, and I had one little hiccup where I was sick for a week. I had the flu, and I put a turbo on the truck, and I was headed back. And when I got to the end of March, I looked at my numbers, and I had done $50,000 to the truck in 3 months in the just horrible quarter, economically speaking. But I was on track to do 200,000 until April 7th, and I started the truck one morning at Petro in Scranton, and it was running rough, and I went to move it out of the parking space and um, to get it into the shop, and it went from like 500 RPMs to 3,500 RPMs in less than a second, and started knocking. And I don't. Somebody told me it broke a piston or something, but I knew then we are done. No, there's no fairy godmother. There's no intervention from heaven above. This we are done. This is over. And so I'll go ahead and finish 17 real quick. So I had made this joke when I put the truck back on the road at the end of December. I'm like, look, hell, if all else fails, I'll just go drive for Swift. I'll go be a trainer. They make good money. And so I'm sitting at the Detroit shop in Scranton, and I've got this piece of paper in my hand. It was an ECM report. And the guy had walked in. He said, man, 3,577 RPMs. I don't know what's broke, but it's broke bad. And I'm literally on the phone with Swift Recruiter, and of course this bitch, she didn't, I'm on the verge of tears. I'm like, I'm an owner operator. My truck just blew up. She didn't give a damn about, my problem. And so 10 days later I was driving for Swift, and I stayed there 30 days until I figured out, you're really, you're really just digging a hole out the bottom. And so I worked some temporary local jobs and found a job with Air Gas, and it was a union job, $19 an hour. And I worked there through the end of December. But I pretty much was like, well, this owner operator thing is completely done. It's over. The opportunity's gone. I'm obviously not cut out for this. I'm not made for this because, I mean, I have screwed this up on a level that is so complete, that is so final, that there's just no coming back from this. So you just better get used to, you know, running in the rat wheel like everybody else, because you are not any good at this.
Well, 2017, I met a guy at the Louisville Truck Show. I used to go to the Louisville Truck Show, and I would go one day. It's like Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Thursday, Friday, I would go for my own, benefit. But Saturday, I always spent at the Landstar booth, because a lot of drivers go to the show. They come by the booth and they don't realize that to drive at Landstar, you have to own a truck. And so a lot of people would come by there and not have a truck. It was a good recruiting place for me. I was always looking for drivers. And so this guy comes along, real good looking, young African American guy, clean cut. We start talking, and he's active duty special forces instructor down in Fort Bragg, North Carolina. And his grandfather was a trucker. His father was a trucker. He already owned a
Cab over.
cab over, older truck that he just had for the shit of it. And he says, "Look, I'm going to be I'm getting out of the Army in a few years." And he said, "I want to be a fleet owner." He said, I want to drive and own trucks." And sort of, it just so happened. It just was a coincidence that I was doing what he wanted to do. So we talked for a long time, and we exchanged numbers, and we went our separate ways. And I'd basically forgotten about him. And so I don't know. A couple months later, he calls me and he goes, "Well, you remember me?" I said, "Yeah, sure I do." He said, "Well, I just bought a truck." I'm like, "You what?" He goes, "Yeah, I just bought a truck." I said, "What'd you buy?" And it's pretty much everything I told him not to. Well, not completely. It was no five. It wasn't completely what I didn't tell him to buy. But he didn't do a lot of homework on the truck.
Hmm.
And he said, I want you to manage it for me. He said, I'll pay you to, you run it just like it's yours, And I said, okay, no problem. So I get the truck and I get a couple of drivers in it for him, and it's just it's a struggle because the truck needed a lot of work, and every time I get a driver in it that was decent, the truck would need something, and of course the driver didn't want to hang around while that happened. So we went through a few drivers, and um, finally we had a driver in it, and the thing finally it had been using a lot of coolant. I mean, a lot of coolant. And so this driver called. He's in Nashville, and he goes, "Dude," he said, "I don't know if this is gonna make it back or not." I said, "Well, do the best you can." So I said, "Just don't turn it off." I said, "Just whatever you do, don't turn it off." So he gets it all the way back to, and I'm trying to get it to my Detroit shop in Indianapolis. He gets it all the way back, and they're closed. So he drives it down the street to the Hardee's, and he, for one reason, for so whatever reason, he shuts it off and stays the night at Hardee's. And the next morning, of course, it won't start back because it's hydrolocked. So I had to tow the truck into the shop from Hardee's, which is two doors down. And
That's
of
eight
course, we get
thousand
the news.
dollars.
Well, yeah, we get the news that it's hydrolocked. 25 grand, easy. So I talked to Niven, who was the owner of the truck, guy in the army. He's like, man, I don't have. There's no way don't have that money. He says there's just not in. There's no way. So this is right about holidays, about Christmas. So I thought, well, let's just think about it for a while. So in January, this would have been of 2018, I guess.
Hmm.
I said, look, here's what we'll do, Niven. I said, I'll pay for the motor. You sign the title over to me. I'm going to run the truck for 3 years and make my money back. Then the 3 years, I'll sell you the truck back for an agreed on price. We'll agree on it. And so we wrote it up. He was happy to do that because it took all this pressure off of him. What was he going to do with the truck in Indianapolis? Him and down
Right.
north active duty in the army. So I fixed the motor in the truck, and I don't think I ever pulled the truck out of the shop. So I see this Facebook post from this guy, and I couldn't believe what I was reading. I mean, I was reading a Facebook post from a guy who said, "I'm a failure and it's my fault. Um, Here's what I did, and it's not Landstar's fault. It's not the market's fault. It's not the agent's fault. It's not the rate's fault. It's my fault." And that was so drastically different than anything else I'd ever read from a driver on Facebook. I said, I'm really, really, really attracted to this guy just because of the fact that he'll admit what his shortcomings are. And I needed a driver for this truck, that I just had bought. So I thought, well, what have I got to lose? So I reached out to this guy. I thought, well, we'll see what happens. I said, look, I'm very interested. Well, he's like blood in the water. All these different guys at Landstar who need drivers. They're all they're all trying to reach out to this guy. Because everybody's seeing the same thing I'm seeing. And I see all these responses, and I think, well, what's the chances of him contacting me? And probably at this point in time, I hand it over to Chris because the person who I'm talking about was Chris Polk. I'll let him give you the rest of that story.
So 2017, I'm working at Air Gas, and it's not much anything more I hated completely than that job. And it wasn't the job itself wasn't that bad, but there's worldwide there's a I don't know 25,000 people that work for Air Liquide, the global corporation, and there's like eight of them that are union, and it's this bunch in Charleston, West Virginia that has signed up to be in the union. And I'm boys, you talk about a cluster. I mean, I have never seen people work so hard to get out of work. And so I go in there, and the only way I make it, only way that I can survive or even hope to survive is to work 20 hours overtime. So I would go in at 3 in the morning. I would stay till 3 in the afternoon. I would drive 45 minutes home. I would fall in the front door, go to sleep, get up at 1:30, go back, and I was doing okay. We were still way behind on our bills, and I didn't know how we were going to get there. And I'm fending off the Wells Fargo and the mortgage company, and they've all had enough of every story that I've had to tell them. But I'm doing all I can. So I worked there through the end of the year, and I get into January, and it was somewhere in the second or third week of January, and it was like 4 o'clock in the morning, and it was like 5 degrees outside, and I was on this godforsaken forklift, and I was freezing my ass off, and I thought, God, this sucks. I would rather be I would rather be driving 3,500 miles a week right now in a sleeper truck than this godforsaken day cab dealing with this forklift in this cold ass weather. You know, I thought this is terrible. It's awful. And it was at that moment, I can still see it in my mind. I'm lifting up this pallet of big compressed gas cylinders thinking, you moron. You you just dipshit. You fool. You killed the goose laying the golden eggs. You made this giant mess, and now here you are on this forklift. And I thought, well, I can't do nothing about it. So I got home, or hell, I might have done it. I might have pulled my phone out and wrote it right there on that forklift. But I put it out in this Facebook group for Landstar, and I said, look, y'all, I screwed it up. I failed. It wasn't the agent's fault. It wasn't Landstar's fault. It wasn't the government's fault. It wasn't the president's fault. It was my fault. I did this. And so if you think that there's coming someday when you will be able to get everything right, that day's right now. It's not tomorrow. It's today. You got to get your stuff together because when it hits the fan, it's going to be on you. And so, like Larry said, man, the messages start coming, and hey, I got a truck, and wow, there's some stupid people that work for Landstar that have trucks. And listen, their pitch to get to come to drive for them is subpar. So I don't know. Somebody tagged you, or you tagged yourself, or something, and so I called him, and from the first time I answered the phone, I was like, oh, okay. I think this guy might be something. Now, I've not told my wife a word of this. I haven't told her about my Jerry Maguire moment where I've wrote my little manifesto, and I've said a word. And so we talked for a minute, and we were going to meet in Moorhead for like an interview. And I mean, if there could have been a video in this house, in the room just to my left, to watch me tiptoeing around my wife to try to get to explain to her what I was thinking, because I didn't have a real good track record of coming up with great ideas. And I said, hey, there's an opportunity, kind of, sort of, maybe, with this guy to drive for at Landstar. And so at first she agreed to go because he wanted to meet her too. And I wanted her to go, because there wasn't no way I was making this decision by myself. I'd learned that lesson the hard way. And so, like, on the day up, she's like, well, I'm not going out there. And I'm like, oh, yes, you are. You are getting in that car, and we are driving. We're going to do this. So she went with me, and we met. And I remember you told me the whole story. You kind of told me the story about Niven. And what I find fascinating is you were telling me, I didn't realize this. About the time you're meeting him, I'm within a week of my truck blowing up. You met him in March at the truck show, and 1 week later, my engine expired. You told me you had the truck. You told me that you were going to retire and you wanted to sell your truck, and then you said the magic words, well, it's got a Mercedes. And I said, I don't want anything to do with it. And but of course, the black truck that you had gotten from him, it was already promised back to him, and all that was left was your truck. And I thought, well, I've just got to get in here and do what I got to do. And he explained that he liked dedicated freight, and I hate dedicated freight. And
I had one already lined up for him.
oh yeah, I had it all put together. And I told Karen, I said, listen, I went back through my numbers through that 3 months of 2017, and I said, if I got paid the same way, on the stuff that I did, this is how much I would make, and it was a whole lot more than I was making at Airgas. And so we agreed to do it. And fortunately for me, the dedicated run he had put together fell apart. One of the legs didn't. He's like, "Well, I'm just going to have to let you go and run the board." I'm like, "Yes, you will." That's well. Watch this. And y'all, buddy, 2018 2018 market was sure enough. I went out and I mean, I had paychecks, gross paychecks that were $2,600. It was insane. But he just turned me loose, and I went out and started putting loads together, and I made, oh my gosh, what was it, 70 some $1,000s in 9 months. It
Well,
was,
there's a little hiccup there that you didn't mention. Okay, so I came home after meeting you, and I'm telling my wife, I said, "Man, as you
oh
know
man,
how all of my life I've always tried to hire me." She goes, "Yeah." I said, "I just think I just did." So I said, this guy's a stud. He said, "It reminds me of me in so many ways. I just see a lot of opportunity here." So we're kind of excited about it. Okay, so now I haven't hired him.
yeah,
Haven't hired him yet. Okay,
I forgot about this.
haven't hired him yet. So by the way, just remind you, I'm a retired professional photographer. And so I was going up to Covington to the Kentucky State Photographers Convention to present an award for somebody there that they'd invited me to do. So I'm up there. I'm at this trade show and all this noise going on. I get a call from Chris. And I'm thinking, okay, well, it's just, it's he's wanting to find out about orientation. What is something anyway? And guys, my heart fell into my feet. He
This is so
calls me.
wrong.
He calls me and he says, "Well," he said, "I've got a decision to make." And I'm like, "Well, I thought you already made a decision." He goes, "No." Of course, he had told me already about his podcast and all the stuff he was doing, and that's part of my intrigue with him was that he was, he's such a go-getter. And so, guys, the people at US Express were just starting this thing called Freight Waves, and it was all brand new, and they were trying to get this thing off the ground, and they literally were wanting to hire Chris to be their spokesman from them to the driver because he had such a good rapport and could communicate with drivers, and they'd offered him a job doing
An
what
interview.
he
They offered me an interview.
Okay,
That,
an interview.
yeah.
To go down to Chattanooga and interview for this position down there where he would be doing probably what he really, really, really wants to do, and that's podcast and teach and everything that we're doing here. And I thought, oh shit, how am I going to compete with this? But, he was so honest with me, there was no way that I was going to try to bullshit him. And I just said, Chris, you got, you got to probably go. I mean, it's what you want to do. And I said, I hate it, but I mean, I can't compete with that. And I can't tell you. Well, I can tell you. He said, I don't think he was really sure of himself about whether or not he would be able to function in that corporate world,
Right.
because that's what it was going to be down there. And he said, I can tell you right now, I know I can come work for you and do you know, what you need me to do. I know I can be successful. I know what I can make working for you. This other thing, it might be great, but it could also be a bomb, and I'd lose the opportunity to work for you. So I'm going to stay coming with you. I thought, oh my God, thank you, God,
Well,
because
and
I really didn't want him to take the job, but
yeah.
there was no way that I was going to talk him out of it.
And it's so crazy that within just days of talking to Larry, I get this message. Hey, would you be interested in, doing something? And I'm such a fanboy of Freight Waves. I love Freight Waves. I love everything they do. I love Craig Fuller. I love, it's just such a fantastic company and everything they're doing down there. And so I was like, what do I do? But I knew instantly from talking to Larry that I could trust his counsel at a time when I couldn't trust myself, you know. And so I called him and I said, dude, I don't know what to do with this. And he talked with through it with me. And I thought, well, there's nothing wrong with going down there. I went down there, interviewed, I met everybody. The place is just as amazing or more than you can imagine it would. But I thought, this is really deep water down here. These guys are doing something incredibly important. I think Craig Fuller is the Steve Jobs of this time, and I wasn't ready. I was not. I was not in a place that I could go down there and give them everything that they needed, and so I made the decision, the correct decision, to come here with Larry, and not even because at that point I'm like, well, I just need to get back to having my own truck. That's and this guy's has proven to me that he knows how to do all the things that I couldn't. He can teach me what I need to know. The clock's ticking. He's getting out, so I've got to get as much as I can from him in mentoring and training, and so it wasn't very far in that I think we were really both starting to explore the opportunities of what we could do together. But I
Well,
was,
well, here's what I on the phone. We would have these phone conversations that would last hours because we're both driving, And in this phone conversation, he goes, "Well, I want to be." I think you even used the word "little Larry." I think you were used
yeah,
that term. I want to become little Larry, right? Or the what message was that you wanted to do what I do,
yeah,
and because at that time I thought that all you wanted to do was get a leg up, get back in your own truck, get on your own again, and I was just going to help you transition through that process. Then it became apparent. I think you saw a bigger opportunity along the way, and I recognized the fact that I had something going here that I was basically going to just let go because of my age and of my son didn't have an interest in this business and da 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 da. And I think it dawned on me that wait a minute, I've got a survivor here. I've got someone that I can not only not let it attrit and go away and be worth nothing, but now I have the opportunity to with collectively with him to maybe turn it up and make it worth something. And then now I've got someone that can take it over and run it, and maybe I can make a little money a little longer than I thought I was. So we started exploring this whole idea of this possibility of him becoming the owner of Blue Ribbon Logistics in due time. And of course, since then we've both just embraced that idea, and it became a partnership of minds quickly, even though we're not a partnership legally,
right.
at this point in time. But I think at that time we started using that pronoun that you mentioned before of we a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I probably startled you a little bit because I probably used it before you were. Because I
Mm-hmm.
remember one time you even asked me, "You're saying we all the time," and I'm like,
Yeah,
"Well,
what's
yeah.
this sweet stuff you're talking
What's this
about?
we shit?"
Yeah. Well,
So in my
there was a fundamental shift that happened in me somewhere along in those first few months. In the last episode, we talked about why you would want to be an owner operator. And one of my motivating factors was desperation. I needed to increase my income. I had to. In my mind, the only way I could meet my goals and achieve what I wanted was to own a truck. Well, I realized pretty soon working here, I'm like, oh, wait. I'm literally making more money now as a company driver than I did as an owner operator when I was on my own. And that desperation went away. Did I still want to own a truck? Yes. Do I still want to own a fleet? Yes. Do I desperately have to? Is that the only possible way I'll ever achieve my goals? Well, no, because I'm making $100,000 a year as a company driver. So, if I would have had that opportunity back in 2010, well, that would have been a different path that I could have chosen. I just literally did not know that this was possible. And when I told him that, I'm like, well, I don't really desperately need to own my own truck. I can kind of be a company driver, hang around here. And that, I think, relieved both of us because he didn't feel like I had one foot out the door. I felt like I had a place that I could call home and I could be a part of building something that was just more than me being a lone wolf by myself, owning a truck and.
Well, and you became the epitome of what we, you know, um, realized could offer to other people, and
Yeah.
that's really when we started this concept of, well, if we can do this for you, for Chris, why can't we not do this for other people? I mean,
Right.
if I can take a guy like you, an awesome driver, a lot of experience, maybe a little bit, you know, short in the business side of the things and your personal financial, but there's a lot of people like you out there. So it opened my eyes up to, I'm doing this wrong. I'm getting drivers that are just drivers, and I'm trying to make good people out of them. And I said, wait a minute, let's do the opposite here. Let's find good people that happen to know how to drive a truck. And
Yeah.
now let's help them become owner operators and teach them the stuff they don't know, because this education doesn't exist out there, and they're failing to the tune of thousands a day.
Yeah.
So that's where this whole concept was born. And obviously Chris has all of the trucking knowledge that I don't have, and I've got the business knowledge that he's gaining. So we both brought something to the party. So we both had something of value that we could contribute, to this bigger thing. And I think at that time we started dreaming, and having some ideas about things that we could explore together.
Hmm.
And that's where and so now we're 2019, and so we got through 2018, a great year. 2019, the partnership started, even though again it's not legally a partnership yet, but the intent is there, our compatibility is there. We're just obviously, I mean, Chris still has the need, not the desperation, but the need to make a certain dollar amount.
Hmm.
And the best way he can do that right now is to remain a driver. But as we grow our fleet up, our goal of 10, it's 10 for a reason. Because at 10, we make enough money as a company that we can bring Chris out of the truck and bring him into, quote, a dispatch, load planner, administrative type, and we can afford to pay him what he needs to make without having to drive a truck. So that's
Yeah.
the reason we're using 10 as the target there for this year. So probably letting the cat out of the bag here, but our goal is for Chris to drive through 2020. And at the end of 2020, he's probably going to come off the road and come into the office. And we'll be, he'll be managing the fleet at that point in time, and then I'll be going on to do other things. We have some other growth ideas. We've probably mentioned some of them, but we're looking at some of the stuff with maintenance and with shop, and also we're looking especially with AB5 staring us in the face. We're looking really, really hard at what we're going to do with authority and with brokerage and stuff like that. So.
Yeah.
So there's some other things that I'm going to be working on that, and let Chris run the fleet. And I'm sure we'll continue to grow it. So, and then at some point in time, we'll transition legally into, he will actually have some ownership and eventually all the ownership. Um, he may end up working with my son, for my son's in the business, but in the logistics side, and
Hmm.
so that may end up being something that we look at down the road, which is
And we've got blockchain coming down. I mean, it's just a matter of time. I mean, we're going to be ready to pounce when everything changes. So
absolutely.
it's a
Well,
fascinating time to be in the business.
and we have teased about this, or kidded about this, but you know, I'm nowhere technologically at the level that Chris is, and so he has drugged me kicking and screaming into this podcast world, and you wouldn't believe the stuff we're doing with digital files and stuff right now. I mean, I'm an old guy that printed everything out and put it in a file folder. Now we have Dropbox and all this stuff, and I mean, it's just amazing the efficiency that he's brought to the operation. That I just would not have done it. So I mean, the value he's already brought is immeasurable. And at this this is Thanksgiving weekend, and I want to just tell everybody out there that I'm very thankful that Chris Polk came along in my life because I it has changed my life. I know it's changed his, and so
Absolutely.
just goes to show you what can happen if if you I don't know, you work hard and do the right things, and you get lucky breaks. And I think both of us fit that situation. So
Yeah. All right. Well, that is uh, that's our decade. It's certainly been a ride for the both of us. If you have any questions or comments, Chris at blueribbonlogistics.com, Larry at blueribbonlogistics.com. If you're interested in driving for us, go to blueribbonlogistics.com and click on Drive for Us. You can fill out a form there and send us your information, and we'll have a look at you. But until next time, everybody be safe. We'll see you.
happy Thanksgiving, everybody.